At my mom's funeral, my husband leaned close, grabbed my wrist, and whispered through his teeth, "Get home now, or I'll drag you back myself." Everyone around us heard him. That was the moment something inside me broke. I stood there beside my mother's coffin, trying to keep my tears from falling again. My mom, Ellen Carter, had been my best friend. She had fought a long illness, and I had taken care of her until the very end. She always said, "You deserve peace, Lauren." But peace was something I hadn't known for years, not since marrying Derek Miles. Derek was standing right beside me in his dark suit, pretending to look respectful. But I could feel his impatience. His jaw was tight, his eyes darting around the room like he was counting the minutes until he could leave. When my aunt began reading a short poem, he sighed loudly, muttering, "How long is this going to take?" A few people turned to look at him. I felt my stomach twist. When I didn't answer, he leaned in close, his breath sharp with coffee and anger, and said it again, louder this time. "Get home now, or I'll drag you back myself." His hand clamped around my wrist. I saw the shocked faces of people nearby. My cousin, my mom's old neighbor, even the pastor. My aunt gasped softly. My face burned with shame. I pulled my wrist free, trying not to make a scene, even though every part of me wanted to scream. The funeral continued in silence, but I barely heard anything. All I could hear was the echo of his voice in my head, that threat disguised as authority. Derek had always been like that. To everyone else, he looked like a hard-working man, a good husband who provided for his family. But at home, he was cold, arrogant, and cruel in small, constant ways. I remembered the first time I met him. He was charming, confident, the kind of man who seemed to know what he wanted. But over the years, that confidence turned into control. He decided what I wore, who I talked to, even how long I stayed at work. Whenever I tried to push back, he'd laugh and say I was being too emotional. Now, standing over my mother's casket, I realized she had seen this long before I did. She once told me, weak but clear, "He doesn't love you, sweetheart. He just loves having power." I hadn't wanted to believe her. But looking at Derek that day, his impatient scowl, his hand clenched in a fist, I knew she had been right all along. When the service ended, Derek walked straight to the car without saying a word to anyone. People avoided my eyes, pretending not to have heard. I stayed behind a little longer, touching the edge of the coffin, whispering goodbye. Something inside me changed that day. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, cold, steady. For the first time in years, I didn't feel afraid of Derek. I felt something stronger, something that was waiting, patient, and certain. I didn't know what I would do yet. But I knew this: he had finally gone too far. After the funeral ended, Derek walked straight out of the church. He didn't wait for the burial or speak to anyone. He just pushed open the heavy doors and left, his shoes scraping on the steps. Everyone saw him go. I stood there frozen, staring at the door he disappeared through, feeling a strange emptiness spread inside me. My aunt came over and wrapped her arms around me. "Honey, don't let him upset you," she whispered, but her voice felt far away. People spoke soft words, offered food, said they were sorry. I nodded at them, but I didn't really hear. It was like everything around me was underwater. After a while, when everyone began heading to the cemetery, I stayed behind. I looked at the flowers around the coffin, the framed photo of my mom smiling in her garden. I tried to cry again, but nothing came. I felt hollow, like someone had taken all the air out of me. While I stood there, little memories kept flashing through my mind. Derek's voice telling me what to wear, saying bright colors didn't suit me. Him checking my phone, asking who I was texting. The time I wanted to visit my friend in Charlotte, and he said it was too far for a married woman to drive alone. I had believed it was just his way of caring, of protecting me. Mom had seen it differently. She'd warned me so many times. "He doesn't love you, Lauren," she'd said one evening after Derek left the hospital in a bad mood. "He owns you. There's a difference." I'd told her she was overreacting, that he just wanted the best for me. Now, standing in that silent room, her words rang in my ears like a bell that wouldn't stop. When I finally left, the sun was low, turning the sky orange and pink. Derek's truck was gone from the parking lot. I drove home slowly, gripping the wheel hard. Every mile felt heavier than the last. When I walked through the front door, the house was quiet except for the sound of the TV. Derek was sitting on the couch, eating chips, like nothing had happened. He looked up and said, "You took long enough. Did you even bother to clean up after the service?" I just stared at him. My mind was empty, my heart cold. He talked for a few more minutes about how boring, the day had been, and how I needed to move on. I didn't answer. I went upstairs, changed out of my black dress, and sat on the edge of the bed. The silence in that room was thick, pressing against my skin. I felt trapped inside it, but at the same time, I didn't want to break it. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, staring at the wall, realizing that my mother was gone. And so was the part of me that still made excuses for him. The next morning, Derek acted like nothing had happened. He poured his coffee, turned on the news, and asked if I planned to mope around all week. When I didn't answer, he laughed and said, "You were so dramatic at the funeral, Lauren. Everyone could see it." I stood by the counter, holding my cup, staring at the steam. I didn't trust myself to speak. He kept talking, his voice calm, almost bored. "She's gone," he said. "You need to get over it. People die. That's life." Then he grabbed his keys and left for work, whistling like he hadn't just ripped open a wound. For a while, I just stood there, feeling that same emptiness again. But under it, something new had started to grow, a quiet anger that I couldn't push down anymore. Over the next few days, I noticed small things that didn't sit right. Receipts for restaurants I'd never been to. Gas charges in towns he never mentioned visiting. One night when he came home late, I smelled a faint perfume on his jacket. Something floral, too sweet to be mine. When I asked where he'd been, he said he was working late at a client's house. I didn't argue, but I didn't believe him either. The next morning, I found a folded napkin in his jeans pocket with a lipstick stain on it. When I held it up, he laughed. "You really need a hobby," he said. "You're acting paranoid." He snatched it out of my hand, tossed it in the trash, and added, "You're lucky I put up with this." That word, lucky, stuck with me all day. I kept thinking about how easily he twisted everything, how he made me doubt what I saw with my own eyes. It was always my fault. I was too sensitive, too emotional, too suspicious. That night, I lay awake beside him, listening to his steady breathing. The anger was still there, but it had changed shape. It wasn't loud anymore. It was calm, sharp, like ice forming over water. I started to notice every word he said, every lie that sounded too smooth. I began keeping quiet notes in my mind. The time he got home. The way he avoided looking at me when I asked simple questions. The smell of perfume. The new shirt he hadn't told me about. The cash withdrawals that didn't make sense. I started keeping a small notebook in my purse, pretending it was for grocery lists. Inside, I wrote single words: perfume, cash, late again. Each page felt like a step out of the fog. When Derek looked at me, he still saw the same obedient wife who would forgive him no matter what. But something in my eyes must have changed, because he stopped meeting them as often. He thought he still had control, but he didn't know I'd finally started paying attention. And once I started, I couldn't stop. A few days later, I drove to my mom's house to start going through her things. The place felt strange without her. The air still smelled faintly of her lavender lotion, and her reading glasses sat beside the couch, like she might come back any minute to pick them up. I stood in the doorway for a long time before I could move. Boxes and drawers were everywhere, filled with pieces of her life, old photos, recipe cards, birthday cards she'd saved from me. Every little thing reminded me of her voice, her hands, her gentle way of fixing everything. It hurt, but I needed to do it. I wanted to feel close to her again. While I was sorting papers in her old desk, I found a small envelope tucked between two books. My name was written on it in her handwriting, Lauren. I froze. For a second, I just held it, afraid to open it, afraid of what she might have wanted to tell me that she couldn't say before she died. When I finally did, her familiar handwriting filled the page. She had written, "If you ever feel trapped, the cabin is yours. No one can hurt you there." My hands shook as I read it. I could hear her voice so clearly in my head, calm and loving. I remembered the cabin, an old wooden place near the Blue Ridge Mountains. We used to go there in the summers when I was little. She always called it her quiet place. There was another envelope inside. It held the deed to the cabin and a note from her lawyer confirming a small savings account in my name. I stared at it for a long time. Even after she was gone, she was still taking care of me, still giving me a way out that I hadn't known I needed. Tears finally came, slow and heavy. I sat on the floor with that letter in my lap, whispering, "Thank you, Mom." It felt like she was right there with me, like her love was still wrapped around me, steady and warm. I folded the papers carefully and tucked them back into the envelope. As I drove home, I kept thinking about her words, "No one can hurt you there." It felt like she had known what my life had become, even though I'd tried so hard to hide it from her. When I got home, Derek was already there, sitting on the couch. He didn't ask about my day. He just asked what was for dinner. I said I'd figure something out and went upstairs. I slipped the envelope under my clothes in the back of my dresser drawer. It was the first real secret I had ever kept from him. For the first time in years, I felt a tiny spark of safety. Like maybe, just maybe, I had somewhere to run when the time came. One morning, Derek was in the shower getting ready for work. I stood by the window and watched him through the reflection in the glass. He was humming cheerful, in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. Something about it didn't sit right with me. My gut told me to look closer, though I didn't know what I was looking for. When he left his keys on the counter, I picked them up and walked outside to his truck. I opened the glove compartment first, just old receipts and a few tools. Then I checked under the seat, where he usually tossed things. That's when I saw it, a small velvet pouch. My fingers hesitated, but I opened it anyway. Inside was a gold bracelet, delicate and shiny, with a tiny heart charm. On the inside it was engraved, to D. Love, Haley. My heart stopped. Haley. I knew that name. She was his co-worker, the woman he always mentioned from the office. Haley said this. Haley brought donuts. Haley's husband doesn't appreciate her. I'd never thought much of it before, but now every mention of her came flooding back like a storm breaking loose. I stood there for a moment, the bracelet cold in my hand. I could feel my pulse in my ears. It was like the ground had opened under me. I slipped the bracelet back into the pouch, put it exactly where I found it, and walked inside. My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit down. For the rest of the day, I tried to act normal. I made dinner, cleaned the kitchen, answered his questions. But every time he smiled, I saw the bracelet in my mind, the way her name looked carved into gold. That night, when he came home late, I asked where he'd been. He said, just working with Haley on a late project. He didn't even try to hide it. I nodded, pretending to believe him. A few days later, I heard him in the living room talking on the phone. His voice was soft, different, the way he used to talk to me years ago. I stayed quiet in the hallway, listening. Just a little longer, babe, he said. Once Lauren gets her mom's inheritance, we'll have what we need. I promise. My stomach dropped. My knees nearly gave out. He hadn't just been cruel, he had been waiting. Waiting for my mother to die, waiting for what she left behind. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. When he hung up, I walked quietly back to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed. I stared at the wall for a long time, not even crying. The tears wouldn't come. It was too deep for that. What I felt wasn't sadness anymore. It was something sharper, heavier. In that moment, I realized Derek hadn't just broken my heart. He had been planning to destroy me. And I wasn't going to let him. The next morning, I woke up before Derek. He was still asleep, his arm thrown over the pillow, looking peaceful. I lay there for a while, staring at him, feeling nothing. No anger, no fear, just a calm emptiness. I knew what he was doing now, and I knew I had to be smarter. When he finally woke up, I smiled at him like everything was fine. I made coffee, packed his lunch, even kissed his cheek before he left. He looked surprised, almost suspicious, but then he smiled, thinking he still had me fooled. That was exactly what I wanted. Over the next few days, I played the role of the perfect wife. I laughed at his jokes, made his favorite dinners, and listened when he complained about work. I nodded and smiled while, inside, I was counting down the days. Each time he left for work, I quietly packed a few things. A sweater, some photos, my mom's jewelry, important papers. I placed them in a small box in my car trunk, then drove them to the cabin. The road was long and quiet, surrounded by trees. Each trip felt like I was breathing again, like I was moving a little closer to freedom. The cabin looked the same as I remembered, small, peaceful, tucked away in the woods. My mom had filled it with love years ago, and it still felt like her. I left my things there carefully, hiding them in the closet. I didn't stay long. I didn't want Derek to wonder. One afternoon, I drove into town to meet a lawyer, my mom's old friend, Mr. Harper. He had known me since I was a kid. I told him I wanted to make sure the cabin and the savings account were in my name alone. He looked at me for a long time, like he could see the truth in my eyes, then nodded. Your mom would want you to be safe, he said quietly. By the end of the meeting, everything was secure. Derek couldn't touch a cent of it. That night, Derek came home angry about something at work. He slammed the door, muttered curses, and started yelling about the dinner not being ready. I didn't argue. I set my phone on the counter, recording quietly. His voice filled the room, sharp and cruel. Every word burned, but I stayed calm, letting him talk. I started doing that often, recording when he shouted, when he called me names, when he twisted stories to make me feel small. Each clip was proof of who he really was. Every day, I smiled a little more in front of him, but it wasn't real. It was a mask I wore so he wouldn't see the change happening inside me. I wasn't scared of him anymore. I was planning, step by step. He thought he still had control. He didn't realize I had already started walking away, one quiet move at a time. Derek decided to host a dinner party one Friday night. He said it was for business, just a few coworkers coming over. I already knew what that meant. Haley would be there. He tried to act casual, but I could see the excitement in his eyes when he mentioned her name. I smiled and told him it was a great idea. Inside, I was calm, almost too calm. I spent the whole day cleaning, cooking, and setting the table. Derek didn't lift a finger, just walked around giving orders. "Make sure the house looks perfect," he said. "I want to make a good impression." I nodded and did everything he asked, keeping my voice light. When the doorbell rang, Derek's whole mood changed. He became charming and loud, welcoming everyone like the perfect host. Haley walked in wearing a red dress and a bright smile. She hugged him a little too long. I caught the look they shared. It was quick but clear. My stomach tightened, but I didn't let it show. During dinner, Derek bragged about his work and made jokes at my expense. Every time I spoke, he interrupted. When I brought out dessert, he rolled his eyes and said, "You finally did something right tonight." The table went quiet for a moment, and then he laughed like it was just a joke. Everyone forced a smile. Haley giggled softly, glancing down at her plate. I stood there holding the serving dish, feeling all their eyes on me. For a moment, I almost felt the old pain, the sting of humiliation, but then it disappeared. I placed the dish on the table and smiled. "I'm glad you all liked dinner," I said calmly. "Excuse me for a moment." I walked upstairs slowly, every step steady. In our bedroom, I opened the drawer where I'd kept my folder. Inside were printed copies of bank statements, photos, and the recordings I'd made of his outbursts. My hands didn't shake this time. I placed them neatly in my bag along with my wallet and keys. Downstairs, I could hear laughter again, his voice loud and confident. He had no idea what I was doing. I checked my phone one last time and confirmed the final transfer. My savings and inheritance now safe and unreachable by him. I changed into jeans and a sweater, took one last look around the room, and quietly closed the drawer. My mom's necklace glinted on the dresser. I picked it up and put it on, feeling its small weight against my skin. It felt like she was there, watching me leave. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps soft on the carpet. No one noticed as I slipped out the back door. The night air was cool and still. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. As the house disappeared in the rearview mirror, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, peace. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just kept driving, steady and quiet, toward the cabin waiting for me in the mountains. The cabin was quiet when I arrived. The air smelled of pine and rain, and the trees moved gently in the wind. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. It looked just like I remembered, small but warm, with the old wooden furniture my mom had loved. For the first time in years, I felt safe. The first few nights were strange. I would wake up expecting to hear Derek's footsteps or his angry voice from the other room. But there was only silence. It took time for me to understand that silence could be peaceful, not frightening. I made coffee in the mornings, sat on the porch, and watched the sun rise over the hills. The quiet started to feel like freedom. Then the calls began. At first, just one or two a day. Then dozens. Derek's name flashing on the screen again and again. I didn't answer any of them. Sometimes he left messages, his voice jumping between fake concern and pure anger. "You can't just leave like that," he said in one. "Come home like a real wife." In another, he shouted, "You'll regret this, Lauren. You think you can live without me." I deleted every message. I didn't owe him another word. A few days later, I met with Mr. Harper, the lawyer. He had already prepared the divorce papers. I handed him the folder of evidence, recordings, receipts, photos, and the copy of the bracelet I'd taken before leaving. He listened quietly while I explained, though he already knew most of it. He looked at me when I finished and said, "You've done the right thing." Hearing those words felt like lifting a weight off my chest. We filed everything that afternoon. After that, I tried to focus on small things, painting the front steps, cooking simple meals, reading old books. But each day, I got updates from Mr. Harper. Derek had received the papers and was furious. He had tried calling him, threatening to fix this, but it didn't matter. The proof was solid. Soon, parts of the legal case became public. His messages, the recordings, the evidence of the affair. Some of his clients saw it. One by one, they stopped hiring him. His business started to fall apart, not because of anything I said, but because of what he had done. I didn't feel joy watching him fall. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about peace, real peace. I sat on the porch one evening, the phone buzzing again beside me. I let it ring until it stopped. The world was quiet again. The sunset painted the trees in soft orange light. I wrapped my mom's old blanket around my shoulders and breathed in the cool air. Derek could shout, threaten, or beg all he wanted. I was done listening. He had taken enough from me already. Now, I had something he would never have again, freedom and silence that belonged only to me. It was late afternoon when I heard the sound of a truck coming up the gravel road. At first, I thought it might be a delivery or one of the neighbors, but then I saw it through the window, Derek's truck. My chest tightened, but my hands stayed steady. I had known this might happen someday. The truck stopped, and the door slammed hard. A few seconds later, the pounding started. "Lauren," he shouted. "Open this door right now." His voice was rough, shaking with anger. The sound echoed through the trees. I didn't move. He hit the door again, harder this time. "You think you can hide from me? You're my wife." His words were full of fury. The walls seemed to shake with each hit. I picked up my phone and dialed the sheriff's number without hesitation. "Sheriff Nolan, it's Lauren Carter," I said calmly. "He's here." The sheriff's voice was steady. "Stay inside, Lauren. Lock the doors. We're on our way." I hung up and moved to the front of the cabin. Derek was still shouting. "You think you're better than me now? You took everything from me." He kicked the door so hard it rattled in the frame. His face appeared in the window for a split second. Red, furious, wild. "Derek," I said through the door, my voice even. "You need to leave. There's a restraining order. You're breaking the law." He laughed, a bitter sound. "You and your stupid papers don't scare me. You belong with me." I didn't answer. I just stood there, calm and quiet, until I heard the faint sound of sirens in the distance. Derek froze. The sound grew louder, closer, until flashing blue lights cut through the trees. 2 sheriff's cars pulled up behind his truck. Derek turned, yelling, "This is my wife. She can't do this." But the deputies didn't listen. Sheriff Nolan, an older man with kind eyes, stepped forward. He had been my mom's friend for years. "Derek Miles," he said firmly, "you're under arrest for trespassing and violating a restraining order." Derek tried to argue, but the deputies were already pulling his hands behind his back. His voice turned desperate, shouting my name like it would change something. I opened the door then, just enough to step onto the porch. He looked at me, his face a mix of anger and disbelief. For a moment, I almost saw the man I used to love, but then I remembered everything he had done. I stood tall, met his eyes, and said quietly, "You dragged me down long enough. Now you can drag yourself out." He stopped shouting. The deputies led him to the car. The truck's engine went quiet, and the woods fell still again. I stayed there until the sirens faded. The evening air felt cool against my skin. I closed the door, locked it, and let out a slow breath. For the first time, I truly believed it was over. The grass was green and soft under Lauren's shoes as she walked toward her mother's grave. The air smelled of spring, fresh and calm after the rain. She carried a small bouquet of daisies, her mother's favorite, and knelt down in front of the simple headstone that read Ellen Carter, beloved mother and friend. For a long moment, she just looked at the flowers, her hands resting in her lap. The world was quiet except for the rustling of the leaves. Then she spoke, her voice low but steady. "I finally came home, Mom. You were right about him." The words didn't come with tears this time. There was sadness, yes, but also peace. She brushed a bit of dirt off the stone, tracing her mother's name with her fingers. "You told me one day I'd be strong enough to walk away. I didn't believe you back then, but I do now." A light breeze moved through the trees, and for a moment, it felt like her mother was there, smiling somewhere close. Lauren smiled too, small and soft, then placed the daisies neatly at the base of the grave. On the drive back to the cabin, the sun broke through the clouds. The light spilled across the road, warm and golden. The cabin came into view between the trees, looking peaceful and alive. Inside, everything was simple but full of warmth. The walls were lined with old photographs, her mother in the garden, laughing with a young Lauren on her lap. A quilt her mom had sewn years ago was folded neatly on the couch. The place smelled like pine wood and coffee, like safety. She made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the sunlight dance across the floorboards. The mountains stood tall outside, silent and steady, the same way they had been her whole life. There were still moments when she felt the scars inside her, but they didn't hurt the same way anymore. They were reminders, not of pain, but of what she had survived. She thought of Derek sometimes, but only in passing, like a shadow from a story that no longer belonged to her. He had tried to control her, to break her, to make her forget who she was. But he had failed. Lauren looked out at the horizon, her fingers wrapped around the warm mug. A small smile touched her lips as she whispered, "He tried to drag me home, but I found my way instead."